Zikar.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson is absent. Commissioner Liu.
Here from Northwell Township.
Commissioner Margolis is absent. Lieutenant Mike Sherba.
Here from Tyrone Township.
Commissioner Stupka is absent. With that, we do have quorum.
Thank you. There are two items on the consent agenda tonight, approval of the agenda and approval of the minutes from December's meeting. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Moved by Wanru, seconded by Megan. All those in favor, please say yes or raise your hand.
Yes.
All those opposed, please say no or raise your hand. The consent agenda is approved. Next up is public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Again, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 934-6385-2907 or connect via Zoom as described on the agenda. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number or the person's Zoom ID. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone or select the raise hand button in Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Chris, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
This time I'm not seeing any.
No hands raised?
Seeing none, I believe we are okay to proceed.
Okay. And as a reminder, of course, there are 5 emails in our packet, so please take a look at those if you haven't already. Next up are, I think, our only business item tonight. Yep, our only business, well, no, sorry. Our first business item of the night are chair and vice chair elections. So it's that time of the year to select a new chair and vice chair. And so, Luke, if you wanted to walk us through the process.
All right, I will. Pursuant to the Commission's bylaws, a new chair and vice chair must be seated by March 1st of each year. And the election for these positions must occur at least 1 month before the current officer's term expires. Therefore, we must conduct the elections for chair and vice chair tonight. You may have seen in the homework guide the responsibilities of the chair and vice chair officer positions. The chair shall preside at all meetings and shall decide points of order and procedure, subject to the provisions of these bylaws. The chair shall have the privilege of discussing and voting on all matters before the commission. The vice chair shall assume the duties of the chair in the chair's absence. So with that said, are there any nominations tonight for chair and vice chair of the Transportation Commission?
Yes, Megan.
So I am not running again for vice chair, just throwing that out there. My term is up in May. I've had a great time as vice chair, so I would encourage others to put themselves forward if they would like to. But I do want to nominate Brett as chair again. He's done a great job. He's great to serve with. So thanks, Brett.
Thank you. And thank you, Megan, especially for the last 2 years as vice chair and filling in when needed. I would like to nominate Kate, if she is willing, for the vice chair position.
I'm willing. I don't know if that was what I was supposed to say, but yeah.
Robert's rules says, yeah, no, that's fine, yeah. Any other nominations? A note, I don't think Luke mentioned this, but there are 3-year term limits for both positions. So this, if I am elected, 2025 would be my 3rd year. So I intend to stay on the commission, but I will not be able to be chair next year. nobody can serve consecutive 3-year terms. That doesn't mean that anybody that's served in the past as chair or vice chair can't come back later and serve in the other position or the same position after a gap. So just so everyone is clear on that. All right, so with that, let's see if there's a motion to elect myself as chair and Kate as vice chair. Moved by Dharma, seconded by Eric. All those in favor of the motion, please say yes or raise your hand.
Yes.
All those opposed, please say no or raise your hand. Motion passes. Congratulations, Kate. Throwing you into the fire very quickly, but I appreciate it. All right. Next up, the 2024 annual report. Included in the packet is a final draft of the 2024 annual report for the Transportation Commission. We reviewed the draft last month, and staff is asking for a vote this evening. So Chris, if you wanted to give an overview of the document now in its final draft form.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm sharing my screen if I can just get confirmation that it is being shared. Okay, so not a lot of changes happen. The main change that I would like to point out is, at a glance, the numbers have been adjusted to include the December meeting. So 27 motions passed, 12 business items were presented, 26 information items shared, 72 public comments, three new committee members appointed, with only one cancellation in 2024. Now we're seeing the introduction and our statement from our chair. The motions and actions, the only thing that changed was the addition of the December and some adjustments of some headers to more adequately represent the motion that was passed by the Transportation Commission. Here, let me. Mainly, it was the recommendation for parking removal on Pauline Boulevard, the main header that was altered from last month. In terms of future agenda items and presentation, again, the only main change from last month is the addition of this December. Here, I'll scroll down a little bit. The addition of the December files, and that pretty much sums up the changes that this commission is observing from last month's annual report. I do apologize for my voice if it sounds a little raspy. In January, we're starting strong in January, to say the least. And yeah, now with that said, I guess the last edit is the addition of our picture. And yeah, at this time, I'll open the floor for any comments from the commission, and hopefully a motion in favor of the report.
All right, any comments on the report as it sits? All right, seeing no hands, then is there a motion?
My hand is raised.
Oh, yep, sorry, Dharma, yep.
Just to make a funny comment that I'm very impressed that you got a photo of all of us with our eyes open. Good job.
Yeah, no,
Dharma, my eyes are closed,
What? No, they're not. They look open to me.
but I'm okay with it.
All right. Okay. So is there a motion to approve the annual report and forward it to City Council? Moved by Megan, seconded by Dharma. All those in favor, please say yes or raise your hand.
Yes.
Thank you. All those opposed, please say no or raise your hand. The motion passes. We will send this along to City Council. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. All right, next up, information and discussion section. The first topic is a staff report on coordination with the Ann Arbor Public Schools. City staff work with the Ann Arbor Public Schools on customer requests and capital projects. So staff, I believe Cyrus is here, will present on existing collaboration and help set the stage for discussion. Let's see. Yeah, I think this is Cyrus's topic, right? The floor is yours.
It is indeed. Thank you very much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I think I'm also suffering from a little bit of the January rustiness. Good evening. Thanks for having me here so early in the agenda and in your first meeting of the year. So let me just take a minute to get my screen shared and we'll be on our way. All right. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yep. Well, actually, I'm sorry. We see the other, you might have a different screen with, you have to switch screens.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Looks good.
Could be the presentation and not the notes to myself and other riffraff. Very good. Well, thanks again for having me. For those of you who don't know, I'm Cyrus Nahidi. I'm one of the city's transportation engineers. I, along with Luke and Cynthia, work closely with Ann Arbor Public Schools. Probably in terms of volume of projects and tasks, it probably is mostly me who coordinates with the public school. So I'm in a good position to give you a report on this topic. All right. So my hope is to try to get through the presentation a little bit more quickly to leave time for discussion afterwards. I want to touch on three topics at a high level. First is the ongoing coordination between Ann Arbor Public School staff and the city. So that's just for sort of, random signage changes, meetings by, Liz Margolis and I from public schools meet on a regular basis. Previously, it was Raymond doing that with me occasionally meeting. Now it's sort of me taking that over a little bit more regularly. And then also meetings with school staffs and Safe Routes to School committees at various schools. So that's sort of like the ongoing nature. And then sort of related but project-specific version of that is related to the project review and coordination of Ann Arbor Public Schools capital projects. And then last, I'll give an update on school traffic calming. So in terms of ongoing coordination, this can kind of fall in, there's a few different ways that this looks, and frankly, the Transportation Commission, as currently embodied, is in a good position to know that, because one of the ways that we coordinate is, as I noted, when city staff meet with Ann Arbor Public School staff and Safe Routes to School groups for an individual school as requested. So an example would be, meeting with the Burns Park Safe Routes to School group, which includes several commission members here. And in that format, usually it's myself, Liz Margolis from the school administration level, often someone from the school itself, from a Burns Park principal, vice principal, what have you. There may also be someone from Ann Arbor Police, especially if it's someone who is maybe well situated with the crossing guards or whatever staffing is related to the school. The crossing guard program is sort of a joint effort of the schools and police department, but they're in position to kind of explain some of the enforcement challenges, the crossing guard situation, as it were. So it's that sort of, it's often a meeting in the field where we go and talk about various opportunities, various challenge points, to discuss what we can do, and then what sort of falls onto which party. You know, what's in the public right of way that city engineering staff like myself can help implement change on, whether that's near term or long term. What is, you know, behavioral and what can be changed procedurally with pickup and drop off, maybe on the school property. That's often sort of, you know, that's the public schools and often the school staff itself. You know, Liz obviously has a hand in that, but you know, she's not as close to the pickup drop off procedures as, you know, a principal or vice principal would be for, you know, for that particular school. So things that's kind of what that looks like. And then a related you know, version of coordination is installation of signage and implementation of kind of related traffic changes. So sometimes this can come out of a safe routes to school, you know, meeting in the field. Sometimes it is as simple as, you know, a request from the school to say, you know, we'd like to establish no parking for this stretch that is currently signed otherwise. And, you know, depending on the level of, you know, change needed and, you know, coordination, that can be a fairly simple processing on our end, or it could be a little bit, like I said, meeting in the field to kind of discuss in more detail, what have you. So, you know, as one example, on Nixon Road near Clegg Middle School, also by Logan, but, you know, really in service of Clegg. When I went out there probably 2 years ago now, we helped establish some left turn restrictions out of the driveway onto Nixon because we noticed some queuing that was occurring on the school property, and so we had no left turn restriction coming out of the driveway. Related at the nearby crosswalk for the Clegg driveway, we also installed pedestrian gateways to help improve that crosswalk. That was, you know, as just a point of context, sort of an interim change because next year Nixon will be Nixon and I guess next school year, but I believe this over the next year or two, there will be construction on both Nixon Road as a capital project for the city and on the Clegg property related to Clegg and a new Logan school on that property. So I'm getting ahead of myself because we'll talk about that on the capital project side. And then the last sort of related bullet on this, on how ongoing coordination might look, is, you know, as I noted, those meetings in the field can result in some near-term changes like signage and some relatively easy fixes like installing pedestrian gateways if it's applicable. But there are obviously a lot of changes that involve, you know, pouring of concrete or something a little bit more intensive in nature from a capital perspective. So that what that looks like is essentially incorporating, you know, a requested improvement, whether it's on behalf from the schools or from the schools through the Safe Route to School committee of a given school. We incorporate those changes where we can into our city capital projects. So let's see. You know, one thing I wanted to note, and I didn't really have a good place to put this, but I did want to just make note of it, is that just the sort of some of the constraints involved with, you know, what we try to accomplish, and by we I mean collectively, the city, the school coordinating together, the greater sort of school community that includes parents and the police department and everyone kind of working in tandem to make sure that kids get to and from school safely. And you know, one thing that I know I've spoken with Liz, and, you know, we've talked internally on our team about this as a bit of a challenge, is the question of how much single vehicle parent pickup drop off there is, and that can vary widely school to school. It can vary widely by time of year, you know. But I would just say, and as a matter of broadly speaking, it's something that we would ideally like to, you know, shift, and that's what a lot of the Safe Routes to School work is trying to do, is, you know, enhance that walking and biking environment. And a related piece of that relates to busing. And I apologize, I probably can't speak in specifics as well as I could because this is really the school's purview. But just I will say that one thing we've noted is, there are the busing radius that the Ann Arbor Public Schools has established has typically been relatively wide to try to help encourage people to walk and bike who live relatively closer to the schools. But I also know that has changed at some points in the past, and I think maybe last year came in a little bit, so that houses that weren't quite as far away from the school still qualified for busing. And again, I'm kind of speaking on behalf of the schools here, so I apologize. It's maybe not the most detailed comment, but I will just generally say that I don't think that really moves the needle as much as the schools were hoping in terms of, getting more bus activity and moving away from more single vehicle, single occupied vehicle activity for a parent just dropping off their kid or their several kids. So I don't really that this falls into a category that we would probably have to give some more thought about how to really get that to move. I mean, that's a challenge that obviously the city and the ride, kind of face together to try to get that mode shift occurring. It's a different and unique challenge when it's related in the school context, but I will say that that's a challenge that we've had in the past that we can kind of continue to have. But okay. Map of some school safety improvements that were accomplished over this period of 2017 to 21, which is obviously a few years out of date, but I don't believe I've seen a more recent map or table put together. I think this was in relation to maybe a council member request at the time. This wasn't established as as far as I'm aware, this was an ad hoc report, and that's the type of school improvement communication we provided in the past. So, improvements, you can see on the map that there's, and it'll probably be a little bit clearer when it's shared after the meeting, but we have both public and private schools. Even though most of the improvements are done around public schools, we do have a few requests by private schools, especially they have crosswalks that are on a major street nearby. And what we've kind of noted on the map is the sort of quarter-mile radius from the school properties and what type of improvement was done in that area. So that includes potentially new sidewalks getting constructed, improved crosswalks, whether it's an intersection crosswalk or an uncontrolled local or major street, school zone signs, radar speed signs. So that's all just to say that the work that we do between the city and the schools does bear fruit. It can in any given year, especially for any given school, it might not be as noticeable, but across the city, especially across several years, it does add up, and we intend to kind of continue that in a way that continues to make the improvements we need to see around our schools. So, moving on to the next topic about capital project review and coordination. This is kind of an interesting space because compared to review of our private developments that are occurring in town, the public schools operates in a little bit different. The way we review and do project coordination is a little bit different. It's probably more analogous to how we have review and coordination with the University of Michigan, in the sense that the city's review policy, it doesn't work the same way as it does for private developments. The public schools is a different sort of body of government that the city does not really oversee in the same way. We still have there's still a lot of the schools have our review comments have a lot more meaning and pull within the public right of way. You know, our streets, our sidewalks, our bike lanes, because that is the city's property. Whereas on the school property, we certainly provide comment, and we review that with we reviewed what's happening on their property. But the attention that has to be paid to that is not, frankly, the same as a private developer would have to pay. Not to say that the schools don't listen, kind of like the university. They in both cases, the party doesn't necessarily have to listen to the city in a meaningful or deep way. They don't always, but they do listen. But just to say that there's not exactly the same level of oversight when it comes to what's occurring on the school property itself. So the other thing I wanted to sort of highlight on that point is that some tension can kind of arise when the school is kind of, as the schools are doing this capital work, at a very high level, the basic example is if right now a school, if their current traffic operations for pickup and drop off, if there's an impact and that spills into the public right of way, it impacts our streets, our sidewalks, our bike lanes. What the school is kind of incentivized to do, both to better service, their families, and also to ensure that their impact on the city streets is minimized. The tendency is that more space will be added on property to sort of provide circulation and parking space to pull that off of the public right away. So the result is kind of that there's more pavement that's kind of getting put down on the school property when these capital plans are put together. But there's less conflict on the city streets and sidewalks. So it's, like I said, I just wanted to highlight that as an inherent tension that, and I think it helps explain, again, not trying to put too many words into the school's mouth, but I think that explains some of what we're seeing with some of the capital projects coming through and what is being proposed for their circulation and parking plans. So I'll say that we still do coordinate with them quite well. They take our comments seriously. They don't always, like I said, always incorporate it because of some of those tensions and some of the trade-offs they have to make in their goals. But and then just wanted to make the point that there are pretty different levels of coordination depending on the scope of work of maybe the school's project or nearby capital project work for the city. So, on the high end, for instance, of coordination would be what I just cited before with Nixon Road. Nixon Road is going to undergo a pretty significant reconstruction over the course of 2 years, I believe this year and next year. And overlapping with that is some significant construction work for Clague on the Clague property, where Logan School, currently on the west side of Nixon, is going to come to the east side, be on kind of Clague's current property. So there's regular coordination meetings between the city and the schools and our design teams, our engineers, working on those respective projects to make sure that, even work is going to be happening both in the public right away and then on the school property right next to it. So making sure that that's done in a coordinated way, in a way that hopefully minimizes the sort of impact to the school community and nearby residences is that's the goal. So that's kind of at the high end of the coordination scale. There are some school capital projects that don't have really any impact on the neighboring streets, other than signing to make sure construction trucks will be able to park nearby. And since some of that, for some of the school work, it happens so intensively over the summers that it has, frankly, less of an impact on traffic. And then one sort of unique case I wanted to highlight is at Scarlett and Mitchell, where right now we have a three-way intersection at Fernwood and Lorraine, and that's offset from the nearby driveway to the school. And so we've worked with the school so that when that project goes through, it'll become a realigned four-way intersection. So right now, you can see Fernwood Avenue here, and the school driveway here, and the east-west traffic doesn't have any stop control. Fernwood does have traffic calming that was installed in 2020, I think, and a raised intersection at Fernwood and Lorraine, which is the main crossing area that's impacted for students getting to school. So what'll be installed is this school driveway will veer over, become the fourth leg of this new intersection, and it'll become an all-way stop and still remain a raised intersection with the traffic calming further north on Fernwood. So it's kind of nice. There's, like I said, there's opportunities for that kind of coordination when we work with the schools and do that review. Okay, so I'll try to get through this last topic and then get to questions. School traffic calming. If you're anything like me, every time you hear traffic calming, you think of Calm and Frank Costanza, Serenity Now. That's what I think of every time. So if I don't say it at a traffic calming meeting, just know I'm thinking of. But the school traffic calming toolkit program, however you want to call it, is something that does not currently exist, but by council resolution R23330 passed in September of 2023. The relevant resolve clause is here on the screen and says, City Council directs the city administrator and staff to develop a school traffic calming toolkit by December 31st, 2024. As you all probably know by now, it's 2025. So we are behind. So I apologize on behalf of myself and the staff. We are working through that, and we've done a fair amount of work internally and with the schools. A lot of legwork has already been accomplished, but we're obviously not at that goal yet. So our intention is to meet and discuss this in more detail with the traffic calming subcommittee, and then the whole commission body and city council soon after that. But without getting into all those details, because they will come back to this body soon and to the subcommittee even sooner, I do want to talk about what some of our discussions have been like and what this might look like. What is a toolkit in this context, for instance? Like I said, we've kind of gone back and forth over what the right framing is for this. Is it a school traffic calming program that's kind of analogous to our existing traffic calming program, for instance? So we one thing we kind of noticed in that resolution for all the resolve clauses, not just specific to school traffic calming, but is a few themes that kind of jumped out. One is the idea of being a little bit more proactive, because right now traffic calming, especially vertical devices, before this resolution were only being installed when there was a resident a resident driven petition process that the residents provide the petition, go through the traffic calming program, they approve the project, it gets installed. So, and obviously that limits how quickly and where we can deploy things that can calm traffic, things that can manage speed. And so that's why a lot of the other parts of the resolve clause, focus on incorporating traffic calming devices into capital projects. And then so, we've also talked about whether that means, should there be a sort of separate, there's kind of two versions of this that we've talked about, and they aren't mutually exclusive. One is, how do we set things up so that, just like for capital projects, something related to traffic calming around schools is incorporated when capital projects come up and the opportunity is there. And the other is, do we want to open up a sort of parallel petition process, excuse me, that is not based by just the residents, but perhaps the school, the school PTO, the school safe route to school committee, whatever it is, that could petition for traffic calming near the school. So that's not all hashed out, but like I said, we'll be talking about that with the subcommittee soon, and those are some of the ideas we've had. And again, kind of going back to that toolkit phrasing, we kind of have been, when we've been referring to it internally, we've kind of taken to calling it program, just because toolkit to me sort of indicates the tools that we'd be using to establish a school traffic calming, whatever you want to call it, are kind of the same tools as we have for our current traffic calming program. So I think a lot of it is, how do we deploy those tools? And the other theme about being equitable, and then we spent a little bit of time talking about this as staff too, is ensuring that all schools benefit from this resolution, from what we can deploy around schools to calm traffic. In my experience, having been with the city for 6 years and starting to work with the schools pretty soon after I started, there's a pretty big difference. There are some schools that have very active safe routes to school groups, and that's great. We'd love to see more of that at every school, but we can't force that, right? We want to make sure that every school has that same level of attention, that has the opportunity to have traffic calming installed near it. And then, that the ones that have an active safe routes to school group, even better. But, and again, that can fall into the same categories we talked about before: engineering changes on the public streets or on public school property, changes in the, meeting with those groups to do pick up and drop off, looking at their procedures. And then meanwhile, the schools that have a strong safe route to school group, that community culture, what it extends beyond just the safe routes to school group that we meet with. So it's just a better starting point for traffic safety. And so all to say that we want to give everyone the opportunity, all the schools the opportunity to benefit from this program. So what this is kind of looking like, the way we've discussed it, is in the past, we've kind of relied on the schools to help tell us, like, hey, where are your needs? Where are people walking? Can you give us a walking map? And that's where having an active safe route to school group can help, is they can help provide that information. In the interest of equity and in the interest of trying to cover all of the schools, what we are thinking now is, we've kind of gone through this exercise on city staff already. A few of us on our team can get together, look at the schools, look at nearby streets, and sort of the walk shed, and see it and say, here's where we think improvements can be made. And maybe even, there's some improvements that make sense closer to the school, maybe some lower priority ones as you get a little bit further away. And, kind of marking up a map that way, giving it to the school, and letting the school administration and the individual school staff themselves kind of give us their takes and say, hey, is this right? This is matching up with what you see as your challenging areas, your opportunities about where to make improvements. And we can I think we can go through that process for all the schools. I think we can do that in a shorter fashion than if we just let the schools do it themselves. I think, like we did it sort of as a test run for, I think 2 schools, Bryant and Pattengill. And, if we put our minds to it as city staff, we can kind of continue to work throughout over the course of a year and have most of the schools, if not all of them, have maps produced, by a year's time, and say, here's what, when we have when we'd have those maps finished, that would sort of create this, this information that we have that says, hey, when there's an opportunity, when something is getting touched in this area, it's an opportunity to say, this crosswalk should be improved, or this should be bumped out, or, a raised crosswalk shouldn't go here, things like that. So it, like the other parts of that council resolution, it would be leveraging and depending on capital projects and things like our resurfacing program to kind of help move this forward. And that's seemed to work pretty well, because even last year we had a few locations where that happened. You know, by Lakewood School, speed data was collected, and even though there wasn't a specific speeding problem, there were still traffic calming devices and treatments installed. You know, bump outs were installed. This sort of weird skewed intersection of Lakeview and High Lake was narrowed and sort of you know, made a little bit more typical. And then, you know, meanwhile, if there was a speeding problem, there was, I think, on Burwood, which is not related to a school, but, you know, the vertical devices were installed with a little bit more of that speeding, you know, trying to address that speeding in mind. So we see that as an example to follow, just in the context of schools. The only thing I'll note is that there will be some constraints with that. You know, the council resolution, I think, puts a lot of process in place that helps us to enable and do these things. But it's all kind of with existing projects and programs, right? There's not, you know, separate and dedicated funding source. So if something is done through resurfacing, you know, like all those changes I just noted, all of those traffic calming treatments, you know, that probably will come at the expense of resurfacing more roads, absent any other change funding, that is. And likewise, the scope of work, you know, both geographically and in terms of what actual work a capital project might do. You know, if there's a capital project that's touching, you know, one leg of a four-legged intersection, and there's, you know, the other four legs of it we identified as, you know, maybe needing some potential improvements through this process, you know, will that capital project be able to actually handle that, or are we just going to be able to do a partial improvement? Meanwhile, other things like our capital preventative maintenance typically really focuses just on the surface of the road and getting it to a better pavement condition. There's not any real deep digging of work. So that means that things like changing the concrete, you know, installing a bump out, making any sort of horizontal traffic calming devices, you know, wouldn't be part of the CPM project, but we could still do pavement marking changes. We can even do paint and post together to kind of help, depending on, again, if it's within this, if we can kind of fit that into the scope of the CPM project, you know, we'd be limited depending on what project or program is touching those streets in a given year. But it would be it would enable a lot of work to sort of to get done that, you know, might not otherwise have been identified. So yeah, again, stay tuned for that, especially for those of you on the traffic calming subcommittee. But even for those of you who aren't, you know, this will make its way back to Transportation Commission and Council after that. But those are kind of some of the thoughts we had about the school traffic calming program. And with that, I'll leave it to time for discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cyrus. Kate, go ahead.
Well, Cyrus, thank you so much for being here and presenting this. And it's nice to see you and get a further chance to partner with you on this kind of work, having worked in the Safe Routes to School space for a while now. I wanted to go back to the comment that you made about the bus radius. And thank you for bringing that up, even though I know that's very solidly in the school purview. When I was reviewing our policy goals that we are, you know, I think tonight going to be reviewing, the idea of mode shifting and a lot of the Vision Zero goals, at least to me, busing of, in particular, our students is a really key factor in being able to achieve those. And as a, you know, 7.5-year Burns Park and tap-in parent who does not have access to busing and will not for the at least foreseeable future, I would encourage you to encourage the schools to engage in a little more nuanced view of what is needed in order to shift people from private cars to busing. I don't think like a across the board minor radius change is really going to address kind of the barriers that create a situation where people drive their kids to school or drive multiple kids to school. I do think there are, if the schools, or if, you know, the city and the schools together engaged with parents and dug into those issues a little more, I think that there would be real opportunity. And I think it would be very welcome by a large segment of, you know, Ann Arbor Public School parents. So I would just encourage you, if you could, to pass along that that should not be, you know, not a movement based on a minor change, should not be, I would hope, not be taken as a defeat on the idea that we can shift more kids to busing versus private cars. I also don't think the idea that widening the radius of busing is what encourages people to walk is at all accurate. I think the only way to address getting more kids to walk and bike, it's going to be irrespective of whether they can bus. And in fact, I think the availability of a bus as a backup will encourage that more. But that, I think, is, you know, very much derivative of the last portion of your talk around how do we improve the safety of the infrastructure for kids getting to and from school. And I realized that wasn't a question. It was just a very long,
Okay.
But thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, no worries. Point well taken. I made sure to call it open discussion because I didn't want to just make it about what questions you have for me. I know, you know, I'm certainly not the only guy. I'm presenting a staff report about us in the schools together, and you know, there's things that they, you know, that I can't speak as well on their behalf for, and you know, there's obviously other parties besides city staff and AAPS staff as part of this. No, I would just say that point's well taken, and I agree that it's not as, you know, even in the extreme case of if busing were available to every student, I think there'd still be other changes that would have to be made to really encourage busing, as an example. So I think you're right that it's not as simple, you know, and you know, I see Matt's nodding. I'm sure you understand that it's the same thing. The bus service is like a prerequisite. It's necessary but not sufficient, right? And so yeah, it's, you know, there's kind of this combination of measures we'll have to take to hopefully, you know, limit a number of parents that are doing pickup and drop off in individual vehicles, but then also for those, you know, for everyone, however they're getting to school, making sure that, you know, the ones who are driving in individual vehicles, you know, there's a safety factor that everyone arriving by every mode can get there safely. So.
Well, and just to make sure I was clear too, my comment about the busing was I do think that there should be changes to the busing radius, and I do think that will be impactful. Just it's doing it in a more thoughtful. Yeah. Thank you.
And to tag onto that, you know, the more opportunities and more people that would be using school buses would reduce, one would think, the need for infrastructure as these schools are redoing their facilities, less need for infrastructure dedicated to serving individual kid, you know, pick up and drop off. So I you know, how that balances financially, I don't know, but you know, there should be recognition that yes, buses cost more, but that means you also don't have to build as much infrastructure to handle single car pick up and drop off. Eric?
I know we have two in the queue, so I don't want to. But I just realized one other point to this topic that I forgot to include. I'm sure it's not news to anyone here, but you know, this is all also assuming that like they can actually get like necessary staff and bus equipment to like do what they need to do. As you all know, that's been a challenge from before COVID. It's especially acute after COVID. So, you know, again, that's all just to try to get to like sort of the necessary part, the necessary but not sufficient, you know, just trying to get to a place where you can provide more bus service if that's, if that's going to be part of the goals, that's just to get that in place. Just to highlight that challenge. So.
Understood. Yeah, I've heard similar things about crossing guards. Eric?
Yeah, I'd also thank you for the presentation. I think it was really helpful. I also wanted to thank you, as somebody who lives near Clegg Middle School, for all the work that staff's done on the Nixon Capital Improvement project that's going to be coming up. I mean, I think it'll be a huge benefit for a lot of the people that use the corridor, both with cars and outside of cars. My main question, I've been to quite a few of the school capital project presentations over the last year, and I wanted to go back to, you were talking about like this tension that exists as far as the pickup and drop off situation goes. And a lot of the school, maybe even all of the new school designs have this very long drive line, and you noted more pavement. They're separating drive lines, one for car pickup and drop off, and one strictly for bus pickup and drop off. And when neighbors and community members asked the contractor, the Gilbane contractor that's running these presentations, why is it that these pickup and drop off drive lines are so much longer? The contractor said that it was because of city staff and city leadership, that they directed Ann Arbor Public Schools to increase the amount of parking or drive line area so that they could accommodate everybody who would ever possibly pick up or drop off their child. So their goal as a contractor was to create a much longer drive line so that nobody would ever have to park on city streets to pick up and drop off their car or their their children when they're picking up and dropping them off with the car. So my question is basically like, is that a city policy? Is it a city policy that we are encouraging the schools to encourage parents to park on school property and not in neighborhoods where there is on-street parking?
Can you all hear me? I think I apologize. I think I lost a little bit of what you said, but I think I can probably answer it nonetheless, because I think I heard enough, even with missing, a few segments in the middle. But that's interesting to hear, and I will say that I don't necessarily doubt that, because who they're hearing that from could be a number of people, right? And like I said, there is a tension there. If they ask the fire chief, for instance, the fire chief probably does want all of them on school property. And so all I can say is I have not been part of all those discussions at a high level. At least I think in my individual conversations when it comes to project review and with the school staff, I don't necessarily make I don't necessarily. I try to be mindful of where there's a real significant impact onto the street. But even in that case, it's never really been my go-to prescription to say you need to create that space on your property. But that is just speaking for me personally, and I'm not high person on the totem pole when it comes to city and school communication. So I don't doubt that they've heard that. I don't exactly know in what manner and in what conversations. And like I said, I think it speaks to the fact that there are different stakeholders that feel differently about that. The simplest answer, for better or worse, is often this is our opportunity to build something, and so let's try to build our way out of this issue where there's a public right-of-way spillback. So I guess I'll put it this way: when the products have come forth and have that extra pavement, I don't really think I'm personally in a position to say you should take all this pavement out and totally change your plans, because even if I made that comment, as I noted, they're not totally beholden to it. And meanwhile, they're hearing other messages about why it does make sense to do that. So, but I can't speak to exactly how and who and how they've heard that message. But I don't. It's not surprising, because there's validity to that. But as I think you noted, but I missed part of it. It can be taken to an extreme, and I think that's where that tension is maybe coming up. So.
Thank you. Dharma?
Cyrus, did you heard the question?
Thank you.
Can we repeat it? I want to make sure Cyrus heard all the question. If there's some question about whether or not we heard all of the arguments.
Erica, do you think do you feel like Cyrus addressed everything, or are there some other parts that you wanted to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my main question is it city policy that we encourage the schools to build capacity to accommodate pickup and drop off on site and discourage neighborhood parking or public parking? And it sounds to me like we don't have a policy, and that it sounds to me that some people on staff feel one way, and some people on staff or fire chief or whoever feel a different way. And it sounds like the school maybe has heard from some of our city representatives that they should be encouraging off-street on school property additional infrastructure. My main concern with that is that we're encouraging more built environment for more pickup and drop off with single vehicle use on the school property. And if they're hearing mixed messages from the city, I feel like it's really important for us to be speaking with one voice, whether it's city staff or we just really need to decide how we want these things built, and try to encourage the schools, even though the city is not in charge of these projects, to encourage them to build it in such a way that leads to better traffic calming and more walking and non-single vehicle occupancies. And my concern is that maybe they haven't heard that from our staff.
Yeah, and thank you, Pete. I appreciate you making sure that, because there's like I said, there's a possibility I missed something, and I will take the opportunity to just clarify. I am hypothesizing, and I was using fire as just an example, because that is a tension that we've heard before. I've never heard the fire chief or fire marshal or anyone specifically say like you need X amount on the property. But that's just something that's an example of the kind of tension we face in other parts of our work that just makes intuitive sense to me. So yeah, but I agree that I'm just making a bit of a educated guess that there is probably a mixed message, and probably has depended on who they've talked to. And I know from having been in those meetings, they've talked to, they've talked to us, they've talked to the fire marshal, so they probably have heard different parts of the spectrum of that message of, how much about how important that is, I guess, or not. So.
Thank you. Dharma, you're up next.
Thanks for the presentation, Cyrus. I'm going to ask the question that was really helpful, and I was going to ask something similar, because like the light started going off when you started talking about that tension. Do we ever, to ask it in a different way, does the city ever actively encourage the schools to use the public right-of-way as a measure to create a safer drop-off environment? So if I think about like what I've seen in some other cities, I'm not sure if we've done this here, but creating almost like a perimeter around the school where you're encouraging this drop-off to be a bit more spread out, and for people who can to walk from their cars.
Yeah.
so that it creates a safer zone around the school for kids that are walking and riding bikes to school. So I guess what I'm asking is, does the city ever actively encourage the schools to use public right of way or to think about our space in that way and how we can partner with them and like on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is that we have worked with them to do that. I would say it's a little bit more driven by either opportunity or need, which, so oftentimes it's like maybe that's in the context of the existing school property, like Angel Elementary, like we have we have curb space dedicated to like bus loading and unloading by the school property. And this preceded me sort of working with the schools as close as I did, but I think Northside Steam has a little bit of a remote parking type of setup that kind of speaks to what you just talked about, and I think that has a lot. I think that was driven by the need because of the north side being so constrained and where. So I think I don't recall all the details for that because again that wasn't something I worked on, but yeah, we can do more to I think to work with that. But we've done some of that, and I think there's more opportunity. I think is the short answer.
My second question is about safe routes to school and how those are created or determined and like kind of where they live and how much they morph. And I guess shout out to I think Kate and others from the Burns Park Safe Routes to School. My understanding is that there are so-called safe routes to school that have children crossing Washtenaw, which, is 2 lanes going in both directions. And yes, there are signalized crosswalks, but a fair number of parents are not comfortable sending, say, their 6 or 7-year-old across, and they don't have bus service because they're considered to be within the boundary of a safe walking distance. And so what happens is that parents start driving those kids to school. So I'm a little bit unclear about how those routes are determined and how much they're impacting who gets who is kind of within the, I don't know, qualification zone for busing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been great working with Kate and Brett for the Burns Park. So it's funny when you're first asking the question, I'll answer this part of it. I don't know if I have a really complete answer to to that. But safe routes to school is a funny term because it refers to sort of a federal initiative that we kind of use that as that's like the group, for instance, at Burns Park that like of parents and other community members who have met with us to enable those routes to school. But it's also used in a more specific, for specific like actually designating those routes. There are safe routes to school. There is grants and there's grants related to that and work related to safe routes to school specifically as a federal program. I think the question you were actually asking is like the routes themselves. That's part of the name, right? Like how does that get figured out? And that's what I was kind of referring to earlier is like we've in the past depended on the schools to tell us like where are your kids walking from, and we'll try to make our the emphasis of our work react to that, to try to direct our improvements towards where walking is most heavily used, because otherwise it spreads thin pretty quickly. So that's, but as I said, like because we've depended on the schools and the school community, the Safe Routes to School group, and the school staff themselves to help provide those maps. That hasn't really translated into like a lot of walking maps. So we've had like because even for Burns Park, we did create a map eventually. I think in one iteration at least a few years ago, but I think it's as indicative to frankly just meet in the field and have those discussions and identify those challenge areas. But yeah, creating the maps has been a bit of a, I'd say, that's been that bottleneck that I think has like not impacted every school and school community, in a uniform fashion. So that's why, at least in sort of our test case, we said, what happens if we try to put something together? What does that look like? And, I think us on staff, like, were able to put something that made a fair amount of sense together. And like I said, we still use the schools as a review and say, hey, does this make sense to you? Is where we thought to prioritize, where you would think to prioritize? Are you seeing something different? So we're hopeful that going through that process will kind of create those routes you talked about. It'll create those maps in a more uniform manner across all schools and not just the ones that have sort of an active group helping initiate that. So I don't know if that is exactly answering your question.
Or if it sounds to me like the school is telling you where kids are walking from, and the city is using that as a tool to prioritize improvement. So clearly, if the school is telling you that people are crossing Washtenaw to go to Tappan, putting in a signalized crosswalk is better than having nothing. I guess I just question the premise of assuming that most people are going to pick that option. But
yeah,
I think I understand a little bit better about how it's that the school is determining that route. They're kind of telling you maybe where they see the demand or the most activity.
Yeah, I think the schools all do it slightly differently, but at least in my experience, the schools or the PTO or whatever, like can often do a survey to the parents about, how do you get to school? How often do you get to school X way or Y way? By car, by walking or biking, by bus, and then also, questions about the actual geography they take along the way to, what are your challenges, how the surveys are set up and all that is not something I think I've seen survey results and, I haven't really been involved beyond that. But yeah, that how a school goes about getting that information, it can change a little bit, I think, school to school. So.
Do all schools do that as a matter of course, or are you just talking about the schools that happen to have SRTS committees or
The latter?
PTO? Yeah, okay, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, because there's schools I've never taken a safe route to school meeting with. Like, doesn't mean we don't do a change in the area if it's part of our a manner of our work, but it's not going to be on our radar the same way, because I haven't been out there to know that this is important from a school perspective and not just us putting together 2 and 2 to say there's a school nearby. Maybe this crosswalk deserves a little bit more attention because of it,
Okay.
Yeah, just kind of going off of what Dharma said, I'm wondering if there's ever, and this is actually a question, I wonder if there's ever been like a sort of policy statement or guidelines from the city to the schools about here's some basic traffic safety principles to follow when you're setting busing radiuses or you're encouraging travel. So for instance, that crossing of Washtenaw that is considered, a necessary route to Tappan and is provided because there is no busing. That's just inherently, I don't think any traffic engineer would look at that and say that's the safe spot for an adult to cross, let alone a child. So, and again, I think, going back to the earlier busing conversation, part of the issue with the radius is you have elementary schoolers crossing 35-mile-per-hour streets without crossing guards. That's just in my mind, there could be a set of principles that just said, we understand school, you have limitations, but from our, traffic expertise and pedestrian safety expertise, here are some things you should work to avoid as you develop your plan. Has anything like that ever been developed for the schools as a resource?
It's a good question. I'm sure discussions at least have happened, but nothing like that while I've been doing, in this role, helping, do coordination. I think that could be really helpful because you said that that can be clarifying and I will say again, I can't speak to it as well as as someone closer to it could, but I do think there are some nuances to the busing. I think the radius is sort of the biggest parameter that they use to determine who's busing eligible. But at least anecdotally, talking to some other school parents of at my school and other schools, I've not heard that as like an outright principle of like, oh, you have to cross Huron, so like that radius being close is not they get rounded down and are included in the busing radius or whatever it is. But I do think I think that's a good idea, but I'm not aware of anything like documented or sort of as a strategy or goal set up that way.
Thank you. Pete?
I have a couple of comments, and one of them is I wish that we didn't have to speculate about how a school did things like setting busing rates, busing radio. It would be better to have someone here who could give some insight into it. But it's apparently not going to happen. The other thing I'd like to point out is that my experience in the public schools has been that there's a wide variety of involvement of parents at the different schools. And so some schools are, parents are very motivated to do things like start safe routes to schools efforts and have very active PTO organizations. And some schools have, don't have those same organizations or not at the same level. And I would just like to say that from our transportation standpoint in the city, like we need to give the same service to kids at schools that have active parent organizations and schools that don't have active parent organizations. Like we can't rely on them too much because we need everybody to be getting that same level of service that they deserve. So I would just like to be careful about relying on them too much. Like they're a good resource, but maybe that just means that in the schools where they are not active, we need to be working harder to fill in the gap and make sure that we understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I think that's that's something we've known for a while, and like I said, it doesn't mean when. Obviously, what type of improvement could be installed was limited, I think, before this resolution passed. But I mean, I think there's always been a baseline of, our crosswalk improvement guide, our crosswalk design guidelines even speak to this, if it's near a school or, a crosswalk gets sort of extra attention and maybe goes up a design level. So there's always been some of that in place. But I agree that we've also kind of known on staff that there's just by the nature of attention and, like who gets our attention and who doesn't, it's, that's just in the course of doing our existing work. But yeah, the school traffic calming, program toolkit that we're trying to stand up, I think is in response to that. And I think that would go a long way towards making sure that even if you do, whether you do or don't have an active safe routes to school, parent group involved, that you get more than just, hey, your crosswalks are by a school, it gets better design treatment. It's a way for us to it's a way for us to sort of more practically engage the schools. Because I think for a while, at the end of the day, we do need the schools to tell us a little bit about how their populations are moving around, right? Like we can make some assumptions, and like I said, we can do that. We have done that a little bit, but it was only, I think, once we started thinking about a school traffic calming, what does that look like citywide? We just started thinking, maybe we should just create the maps ourselves and not put that first step as onus on the school. Maybe if we kind of create the maps of where we think improvements, where we think, the opportunities exist, where improvements should be prioritized, it gives the school something to react to. I mean, I think everyone here probably has that experience of sometimes writing your first draft is the hardest. So like that's kind of what we're thinking is we write that first draft, we give it to the school, they have something to respond to. We're taking the onus off of them a little bit so that we can get closer to what you just described about providing that same level to all schools, irrespective of how active their community is in asking for these changes. So it's a point well taken. And I think we're using this as an opportunity to try to move towards that. So
yeah, I'm interested in the school specific maps that staff is looking at undertaking. I think that's a fantastic idea. I hope it happens. But I also would strongly encourage staff to make a consideration for their advice on where perhaps it's appropriate to start busing. Have some input. I would encourage staff to take this opportunity to provide some input to the schools based on your expert knowledge of our transportation infrastructure, and to maybe put on the map, we don't think kids should be walking across Washtenaw, that kind of thing. Consider busing here, that kind of thing. So that would be my recommendation. And also the flows of people coming to and from schools change with time, as I'm sure you understand. I mean, 5 years ago there were hardly any kids in this neighborhood. Now there's dozens. So these things change. So I just want to make sure we're not blocking anything in place, so that maintain our flexibility and consider how things might change in the future.
Yeah, no, those are good. These are all great discussion points, and I think that they're all well taken. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I've heard similar things about my neighborhood, that there was a period, I don't know exactly how long ago, we'll say maybe 10, 15 years ago, where it was kind of kids had there was fewer kids and maybe more empty nester stuff, and it's interesting how that kind of changes. So I think the good news is that anything we would talk about installing is probably it would be general purpose like utility, but we've also kind of, that's why the way we've been thinking about it is like really trying to prioritize this stuff, that kind of common sense, right? You prioritize the stuff closest to the school because you're going to be guaranteed to have people, even frankly, the kids who get dropped off, some of them are going to be on foot benefiting from that stuff, right? And you get a little bit further out and there's still opportunities, still improvements to make, but maybe they're just a different priority, or like you really pick and choose a little bit more, instead of saying, because further out you go, the more spread out you can't spread that peanut butter as far, so to speak. So you kind of focus your investments on, a few of those locations. But
Matt.
Thank you. This is maybe an outside the box question, or something that'll get me voted off the island, but maybe an opportunity to engage the planning commission. If you want fewer parents dropping their kids off at school, if the Muhammad won't go to the mountain, maybe the mountain goes to Muhammad. If you want more kids walking and biking to school, can you put more kids within a half mile of the school by increasing the residential densities in those neighborhoods? City councils talked about increasing densities with the transit supportive zoning on major corridors, but to my knowledge, none of that has tried to penetrate into residential neighborhoods. If you want to get more kids walking, I don't know necessarily, it's just, you'll fill the school with people in the walking distance. There won't be any cars left to drive. So it's just a different way of kind of thinking about it. And it might be an opportunity it is within control of the city to upzone or eliminate zoning around the school. Obviously, a big deal worth of more consideration, but beyond my pay grade for sure.
I think it's a point well brought up, especially with the comprehensive land use plan. But you're right. Putting an emphasis on schools, I think, is probably. I haven't heard a lot of that emphasis, so I think it's worth bringing that aspect of it to attention and seeing, how does what's shaping up for the comprehensive land use plan, how does that also affect, school traffic, school enrollment, all that. So
Darwin,
I'm not voting off the mountain, but I'm not sure I have a vote either. So
other comments or questions for Cyrus? All right. Well, that was a fantastic conversation. I really look forward to continuing this on the traffic calming subcommittee in the near future, and we will be bringing this back to this commission shortly after that. So stay tuned, I suppose, is the message. But this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you doing all that you do on behalf of the city, Cyrus. I know you work really hard on all these projects, and I certainly have seen it just in our neighborhood. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. It's always fun to come to commission, see some familiar faces, see some new faces. And hopefully 2025 gets off to a good start. I apologize. I probably didn't help you with the time management part. I know you guys got through the first agenda items quickly, but
okay. That's okay.
Hopefully you'll make up ground. Luke and Brett will run a tight ship, I'm sure. So
yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
You too. All right, moving on then to the fiscal year 2026 policy agenda. Every year we pass along policy and legislation suggestions to City Council's Policy Agenda Committee concerning local and state issues. So we're going to introduce this tonight to begin the discussion, and we will, I think, vote on it probably in the February meeting. But so Luke can review it, but I think the idea is to go through what's here. I think this is from last year, so we can look at Luke's suggestions for additions, deletions, and talk about any other modifications or additions we want to make before we finalize this document. Luke?
Okay, yeah, I'm sharing the screen here, assuming everyone can see it. If it's okay, then I guess for the interest of time, this document is organized basically for two portions. The first half is the state level agenda items, and the second half is local. So if it's taking really long, then we can probably go through it today for state level agenda items, and then leave the local items for next meeting.
Yeah, that's at least state. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Appreciate the notice from Cyrus. City Council Policy Agenda Committee is required to identify items from boards and commissions to help prioritize initiatives for fiscal year 26 policy agenda. Our commission is asked to help in identifying key issues pertaining to their mission for possible inclusion in this fiscal year's policy agenda. In the state level portion, the first item is take any and all action to reduce speeds, specifically those recommended in the Transportation Commission Speed Reduction Committee report, including advocate for the removal of the statewide minimum speed limit, which is 25 miles per hour, and subsequently lower Ann Arbor's speed limits. Advocate for a House bill concerning speeding in school zones. And advocate for locally controlled speed limit setting along state trunk lines, utilizing community input and moving away from the 85th percentile rule. So for this one, there are 3 sub-bullet points. There's not really anything new for the first 2. As to the last one, there was an update to the Michigan compiled law in terms of setting speed limit. There is some additional flexibility for local agencies to use speed limit. That's I guess there's one component. There's a rounding component after the calculation based on study. There's the option of rounding the that calculation result to the nearest multiple of 5 miles per hour rather than rounding it up. So that's one component that's new from 2024. And there's a second component that's also included in the new law, which allows local authority to use a speed limit that is lower than the 85th percentile, but still not below the 50th percentile. And the condition is that there needs to be a study showing that the lower speed limit will lead to traffic safety improvement. So that's the new update. So that's more toward setting speed limit. It does not really talk about the new law does not really talk about allowing any local agency to set speed limit along state trunk line. The trunk line speed limits are still determined by as how they are determined right now, which is in combination of Michigan State Police and MDOT. So, do we have any comment or discussion we want to have on this particular item?
It seems like we want to still keep it there since it does specifically talk about local setting speed limits along state trunk lines, right?
Yes. Okay. All right. I'll keep going, and we can circle back if there's need. The next one is advocate for the Michigan Department of Transportation, MDOT, to make the process easier and more accessible for local jurisdictions to request and implement crosswalks, sidewalks, bike lanes, speed reduction, bus lanes, and the road reconfiguration and other locally supported non-motorized or transit improvements on state roads. Feels like this is also another item we want to keep on the agenda. In our capital project updates, we frequently talk about the mid-block crossings along Jackson and Huron. That is, though, for those locations, staff are still pushing forward with MDOT in their review, and hopefully we can get some positive feedback or approval for us to proceed with the construction soon. Right now, we don't have those yet. So the next item is to advocate for MDOT to further define and consistently adhere to their complete streets and Vision Zero policies, including congestion pricing, tolls, or a VMT, vehicle miles traveled tax. The update, I guess, staff is going to suggest is about Vision Zero policies. MDOT does not really have adopted Vision Zero policies. Theirs is the Toward Zero Death program. So, okay. The next one is advocate for the state legislature, MDOT, and the rail operators to provide safe, non-motorized crossings across active rail lines. If crossings, marked or unmarked, are to be eliminated, then an impact assessment or analysis should be performed before restrictions are made. On this one, it feels this one should stay in here. As recent as yesterday, city staff, and the staff from the University of Michigan and Federal Railroad Administration, we took a whole day field visit to review at-grade crossings throughout most at-grade crossings in the city. The limit was from Summit going down to State Street, including all public and private crossings in this range. And the topic was to start the discussion about possibly establishing a quiet zone. This topic has been touched on a couple of years ago, and this more recent discussion was started by the university because of their recent development for student housing project. So the topic of crossing elimination came into the discussion a couple of times. And so that gave me the feeling that this item should stay here. Right now, we're not looking at any closing any public crossings. There is some discussion about potentially starting the conversation, or I guess from the design perspective, evaluate the pros and cons for some private crossings. The crossing was in a parking lot. So we'll leave that item there. The next one is advocate for increased transit funding statewide. I think this item should stay here. Okay, thank you. Next one is advocate for MDOT to allow bus on shoulder operations on key freeway segments. So the intention is to also keep on that here. Looking for any comments, any additional background, if there's anything new from this year. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Matt. Then we come to encourage the state to consider new revenues. For example, road pricing, congestion pricing, weight-based taxes to replace diminishing gas tax. So this item will stay here. Next one is continue advocacy for a Transportation Commission approved version of a statewide crosswalk law and include Transportation Commission in the advocacy plan for a statewide crosswalk law. So that's very necessary, and that will help resolve, I guess, the difference between our policy and other municipalities to provide uniform, I guess, requirements or law for drivers to follow. So this item should stay here. Next one is advocate for a revision to the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So there is a missing word. MUTCD and missing, MMUTCD to expand bicyclist signage options, including R4-11 may use full lane sign, which is shown in the Federal Highway Administration MUTCD, but omitted from the Michigan MUTCD. For this item, we're at this interesting time that last year, Federal Highway did publish a new version of the federal version of MUTCD. In general, each state is required to develop and adopt their own state version. So this is true for Michigan, that MDOT is working on the Michigan version, MUTCD. Their current timeline for adoption is the December of 2025. So there is a draft version, and I'm on the state advisory committee for that. So the committee has met and went over most chapters. So MDOT is currently compiling the comments and running that through the process with Federal Highway for the Michigan version. And related to the bike may use 4-lane signage, there's an update in the federal version. That sign is no longer there. It's replaced with an alternative, and that alternative signage, it says the wording is bicycles allowed use of 4-lane. So that's on that. The sign number is also updated to from R4-11 to R9-20. So on this one, I will modify the language here to match the sign update and sign number update. And currently, the draft does keep this language in the Michigan version, and we'll for sure visit this topic again when the Michigan version of the manual is adopted. The next item is advocate for legalization of video surveillance and automated tracking and notification of speeding and traffic violations, and that it be accompanied with data collection to determine these disparate impacts on populations. So this one, there was some movement. I think currently there is some relaxation about using surveillance-based data collection and even enforcement. But I think my belief is those are in the work zones. Those have not been like widely allowed for general use on public streets. So this item should stay here, and for speeding, for our parking enforcement, because we do experience quite a bit of illegal parking that block on-street bike lane or cycle track. Having a tool or this tool in our toolbox would be invaluable. Matt, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's I totally support this staying in the agenda. I guess my question maybe is for Lieutenant Sherba. Is there anything in the law prohibiting this city from using automated cameras for shaming purposes? Like, would that be an invasion of privacy? Like if they were just to send a note to the driver, hey, we saw you speeding. Is that prohibited, even if there's no fine?
I think you're looking at a couple different issues with that. I don't know that council would be in favor of that, number one. But as far as your question regarding the law, in order to access a license plate, we'd have to use our LEAN system, or law enforcement information network. And to do that for a purpose of what you say shaming, I would say would not be an appropriate use of it if it was going to be for a.
But they violated a law.
Violated a law, but what's the purpose of sending this information to them?
Maybe shaming is the wrong word. Maybe it's just
notification of violation.
Just hey, opportunity for improvement. I guess my question comes down to, if you can't enforce the citation without an officer showing up in front of a judge, and that's the nuance. If there's an infraction, a violation of law has been committed, an automated device has recorded it, but the city's not attempting to enforce it per se, just notify someone that, hey, we think you made an infraction. Is that technically illegal?
I think the state, if I'm not mistaken, does not allow for electronic citations. So you're correct there. But for the city to use that for a non-citation, for a educational, say, reason. I don't know of anything that would prohibit that, but I also don't know that police administration would necessarily support that, I don't think.
Yeah, the politics are above my pay grade too. I was just asking about the legality. Thank you.
Maybe it's something for the city attorney's office that the council can consider. Speaking of Dharma.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I mean, that's basically what we do for when residents can submit an A2 fix-it ticket with the photograph and a picture of the license plate. And our city attorney's office sends them a letter saying that they have, violated the law. They may, I'm not sure that we've ever ticketed anyone for the process. I know that we have sent letters. But it seems like perhaps the cost benefit wouldn't be high enough to have like the ubiquitous kind of recording that you would need if you're not going to actually cite people. I don't know.
A lot of the stuff we bump into in these discussions is in how to modify cultural behavior.
Yeah.
And there's no way to staff up the police department to the degree necessary. And I don't think people would like the police state involved.
Right.
But I lived in a jurisdiction where red light running and photo radar were ubiquitous.
Right.
Everywhere. And getting the envelope in the mail, they were some of the best behaved drivers I've ever seen.
Yeah, but that's with tickets. I mean, I would totally support that because you're right. We have an issue right now. I mean, I've heard about it twice from two different constituents already today of people just blatantly parking in the Division Street bikeway. So it's incredibly difficult to expect to have enough, citation officers out there that could proactively monitor it to the degree that they do. I guess I'm just not convinced it's an education issue with this violation because I feel like people are doing it out of convenience and because they can. So anyway.
Thank you for the discussion. The next item is allow transportation and transit agencies access to other sources of revenues beyond property tax, such as road pricing, vehicle registration, sales tax, etc. Move away from the level of service as a means to assess impact of projects on the road network in favor of other metrics that don't prioritize vehicular speed above all else, such as vehicle miles traveled.
Are there two? Should that be separate? Yeah.
Yes.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah.
I think both of those still apply, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Support the Michigan Drive Safe bills to restore the rights of everyone who would be eligible to obtain a driver's license in Michigan, including undocumented immigrants, as detailed in Senate Bills 265 and 267 of 2023, and House of Representatives Bills HB 4420 through 4412. Councilmember Ackman.
Just wanted to make a note that City Council has already passed a resolution to the effect of supporting this and sent it on to the legislature and the governor. As you may know, it recently failed kind of spectacularly, which isn't to say it shouldn't go on here and we shouldn't still work with the lobbyists on it, but I wanted to make sure that people were up to date on that.
Thank you.
And then also I wanted to clarify on this move away from level of service as a means. I'm not sure how it got on here, but my understanding, and I guess transportation staff can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we as a city are not required to use level of service as a means to impact projects that are within our control, correct?
I believe that is the case. The latest requirement is to look at the multi-model analysis. So that is the direction we're taking at this moment. Well, before that, the impact analysis is primarily based on vehicular level of service. So right now we're looking at level service, but it's not only vehicular level service, but also multimodal.
I guess my question is just, what are we hoping, like, what are we actually trying to make happen here? Is that we just want the state to move to this model and not just Ann Arbor? Because I think, anyway, I would just like to better understand how this got here or what the thinking was behind it.
Yeah,
We're not using it.
Yeah, I assumed that it would be to encourage MDOT to move away. Maybe those words could be added. If that seems appropriate, I don't know. Pete? Yeah, you're muted.
I was gonna offer up that we don't want MDOT to use level of service when they are changing streets or their trunk lines in the city. So even if we aren't using level of service,
Makes a lot of sense. Yep, I got it now. Yep.
Thank you for that. I think in the interest of time, we can leave the local ones to our next meeting.
First Pete, yep.
I wanted to add one to the state if possible. So based on our discussion tonight, can I propose something?
Absolutely, please. That's
okay. So I just, by way of explanation, I'll say that the $1 billion bond that the school district has passed can be used to build drive lanes, but it can't be used to fund busing operations. That comes out of their, I believe it comes out of their per pupil funding. So this is another example of how the school funding, mix of, from bond money and state money, creates some perverse incentives. So I guess I would like to say that we should be advocating to adjust school funding to give more flexibility for funding school bus operations. Right? We don't want the choice to be like, we want to make it easier for them to fund school bus operations, I guess is the goal here.
Okay. Let's jot it down and then we'll refine the sentence afterwards.
And if someone has a line of communication to someone like Liz Margolis, it might be nice to get some clarification from her. I'm not an expert on school funding, but what I've described is my understanding of how it works. So it would be good to have some confirmation before we add this to our yeah.
Are you talking about the local millage bond?
Yes, I'm saying that we can raise money in a bond to build stuff. We can't raise money locally to fund operations. The amount that we get is set by the state, and we have to spend that money on all of our operations. But we can raise as big a bond, even $1 billion, if we so choose, to build stuff. So building a drive line might be easier to do than trying to cut corners to find funding for school bus operations.
Yeah, I think you should definitely, we may want to ask the schools what they think of that, because that kind of digs into the whole reason for Prop A, and that wealthy school districts were able to raise their own taxes to, it contributed to a disparity in money between school districts.
I agree that it did. And right now it's contributing
system.
And now it's contributing to a problem where it's easier to build infrastructure like this that contributes to our climate crisis and our greenhouse gas emissions. So it might be time to change the way that we fund schools. I think I'm not the only one who feels that way, but this is a specific way that it's affecting our transportation infrastructure in the city.
Dharma?
point is well taken, but I would just say that this set of things will go to our policy committee and to be used as inputs with our lobbyists in Lansing. And I don't think we would be advocating for changes to, that would affect schools. It's outside of the city's purview, once again, even though I understand what you're saying. It's, we're in a holistic environment, but this seems like how school bonds are spent seems very clearly to me within the purview of the schools. And so I'm not sure that it's really within our sphere of influence and control. Just speak city council and the city, not as a community.
Is there anything?
Can I add
Yeah.
something to that? I would just like to say I think my city would work much better if more kids rode the bus and we had more bus service. And any opportunity that I have to ask for that, I would like to take it.
Thanks. All right. Any other, I guess, just quickly, anything else that people want to add or delete from this state list? Okay. Seeing none, then please take a look at the local section and email Luke or any of us if you have any suggestions for additions, modifications, deletions to what's on the local list, or if anything comes to mind for the state list as well. And then I think the goal is to vote on this and send it to council in February. So, all right, thank you. All right, moving on then. Staff report and updates. There you go. You already got it. Go ahead, Luke.
Okay. All right. 2025 construction projects. Street resurfacing. Staff is starting on that, preparing for this year's resurfacing project. The website has a complete list of locations to be completed this year. Diving down into some individual projects, there's the Independence Boulevard Sidewalk Gap project. There's a public meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. That's tomorrow at Mattis Creek branch of the public library. Then moving on to talk about asphalt path resurfacing replacement. There's a list here. There's no need to read through. And the fiscal year 25 crosswalk improvement projects. We're looking to install RRFB, rapid rectangular flash beacon, at 5 crosswalks listed here. And for State Street, in the segment between William to South University, there is a utilities project, and this one will also include the street resurfacing and protected bike lanes, and also transit-only lane in the northbound direction. The project team came to the commission and gave a presentation a couple months ago. Currently, the design work is underway and construction is scheduled for this calendar year. Okay. Nixon Road reconstruction. The construction is on the southern portion of the project limits, is scheduled to start in the spring of 2025, and the overall project will extend through 2026. Pauling water main and resurfacing construction is also expected to be this calendar year. Pittsfield Village improvements design work is currently underway, and construction will begin in 2025 and run through 2026. Fifth Avenue from William to Madison. This is one of the detailed resurfacing project. This one, as to transportation modifications, this project will complete a link of the proposed all ages and abilities network by connecting cycling facilities south of Madison with the William Street cycle track. So with this work, we're going to introduce the first contraflow bike lane, and the construction is scheduled also for this calendar year. We want to talk about this year's miscellaneous utilities project. There is an in-person public meeting scheduled in February of 2025 to talk about the intersection of Harding and Wallingford. Staff did host a public meeting a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. That was virtual and collected comments from residents on this intersection. Staff is going to at this point host an in-person meeting to review the redesign after receiving the comments. So, Kate, you have a comment.
Well, I just had a question about the Fifth Avenue bike lanes. Are those going to be protected? I'd assumed a contraflow lane would be, but I just wanted to clarify on that.
Thank you for that. Contraflow does not really translate to protected. So far, the current design, well, we have not really started on a lot of the design yet. So far, it's a concept, and collecting comments from or input from stakeholders. Right now, the concept is not protected, meaning there will be pavement markings and maybe post, but we're not looking at concrete island or median to separate the bike lane from the travel lane. And that is the comment from DDA. Through the downtown circulation study, there is a framework of downtown streets being looked at as to, in particular, where protected bike lanes are to be provided and where a more shared version of the design should be pursued. This location is not on the map from that effort to pursue a protected form of installation.
This might be a good agenda topic for a future meeting if it's still in the design stage.
Yeah.
I'm gonna add that to the list.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Moving on to talk about products in design and planning. There are several sidewalk gap fill projects that are in design. There are a couple of those scheduled for construction in 2026. Those include Barton Drive, Brockman and Crestland, and also Dexter Avenue. For Apple and Pear area, the design work is just starting. And we are going to report on any further schedule once that information is available. Safe Street for All roads, Safe Street and Roads for All grant project. This project has two main components. One is the near miss evaluation / analytics task. There was a request for proposal that was due last week. We received the two proposals, and staff is reviewing those proposals, and we're meeting internally to evaluate. The other segment of the same project is quick build and speed management. For that one, staff filed the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act document submission with Federal Highway. The official date was earlier this week. So we are working with Federal Highway to address any of their comments to be received. Next one is a new RFP or request for proposal. It is for North Main Street transportation study. The scope of this study is along North Main Street, namely. It starts from Huron on the south end and extends all the way to M14 off-ramps, or off-ramp and on-ramp. The RFP has been posted already, and proposal is due to the city on February 14th. And this is expected to be a joint study by the city and DDA. Downtown area circulation study. This one, there's not any highlight. The study is nearing the end of it. Staff is reviewing sections of the final report. State trunk line jurisdictional transfer analysis. This one, the recent update is that city administrator sent MDOT a letter to officially open discussions for that transfer, and MDOT has received and acknowledged. In the area of micromobility, SPIN's contract, the most recent extension was in December of 2024. The contract was extended for another 3 months. And right now, that's going to give additional time for council to discuss additional safety expectations and what to include in a longer agreement. Eric?
Yeah, the previous section where it says city administrator sent MDOT a letter to open official discussions. Is there a way we can put a date that we sent the letter in the future, so just so that we have that for, future reference?
Yes, we can.
Thanks.
Okay. Right. MDOT coordination. The most recent item is interdepartmental collaboration between public services and police department. There are 3 corridors that we're pushing out, or PD is pushing out the traffic safety corridor for education and enforcement. And there are associated signage. These are to be posted. And 2 of the 3 corridors are under MDOT jurisdiction. So staff sending right-of-way construction permit application. So MDOT has scheduled a staff-to-staff meeting in exactly 1 week to review their comments. And hopefully we can secure permit and start the installation process. Earlier in this meeting, we touched on quiet zone, and that's exactly what this item is. The University of Michigan Smart Intersection Project. This is in the connected vehicle world. There are a total of 21 intersections equipped. So the installation of devices is near completion, and staff is meeting with U of M to talk about bench testing. The first application will be transit signal priority. We apologize, there's a missing title here for OSI, and their update is that there has been a recent award of $2.8 million to help the city design and install dozens more public EV charge ports in the city. For streetlight, with the fresh start of the year, PT has reported fixing 24 streetlights so far. And neighborhood traffic calming program for evaluation and construction, this section is the same as last month's report. Okay, then moving on to talk about streetlight LED conversion. There's not really an update, so I'll skip that one. In the segment, yes.
Has that work started at all or not?
I do not know. After the NEPA clearance, I think there is some other movement. I'm not sure what they are. Okay. It seems like maybe there's already some parts being ordered. So we'll have to report back on that next month.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. In the final section for flashing yellow arrow conversion, there's not a whole lot of update. In last month meeting, we talked about Getty's and Huron Parkway. That location is finalized this month. So in the next report, this intersection will be moved up, and our plan is to work on Huron Parkway and Huron River Drive in this month. So hopefully we can report on that in February. So that is on that. For December, pedestrian and bicyclist involved crashes. We had a total of 5 pedestrian involved crashes. 2 of those are A-level injuries, and there are 3 of them resulting in B-level injuries. And there were a total of 3 bicyclist involved crashes. There's 1 resulting in B-level injury, 1 in C-level, and there's 1 that was property damage only. So with that, the staff report is wrapped up.
Thank you. Moving on to liaison reports. Any commissioners who have a very brief, quick summary, a report of their work on another body or organization are invited at this time. Yeah, Wanu.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. The capital improvements plan or the prioritization plan passed, and that's going to inform a city council budget, I think, in April. That's kind of the schedule. But I did want to let this particular group know that there was a lot of discussion, actually, particularly around the sidewalk connectivity at Sunset. It's near Newport and Sunset. And so the project had gotten bundled to more of a comprehensive project. And so the sidewalk has been kind of postponed until that is until the funding for that is kind of sussed out and the comprehensive transportation planning has been done for the entirety of Sunset. And so we have one of the commissioners that's pushing pretty hard to try to decouple that in the CIP. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up about the north side of Sunset being kind of a point of interest. And then another discussion point was the underpass for the East Maiden Lane Bridge widening, which we talked about pretty extensively here. And I know that City Council went ahead with the repairs and the widening of it. But yeah, effectively, there was a lot of folks that felt that the site, like that is a very dangerous intersection. And so the exclusion or the non-inclusion of the underpass was problematic. Yeah, there's a total of 510 projects there, and then it's obviously gone through a pretty strong prioritization schema. But I wanted to just note those 2 particular like transportation infrastructure things that caught at least the planning commission's eye, and then actually to Matt's point earlier about land use and concentration of low rise density. It is something that we're looking at, and I think we're going to be talking about it this coming week with respect to single family residential and creating some level of like call it a low rise kind of density zone. And then there's going to be a balancing to do between are we going to allow 4-story buildings and traditionally resi single family neighborhoods, and then can we create additional density when we have kind of a finite amount of land that's bounded by the highway. So CIP, and then obviously the comprehensive plan is actually really looking at those particular items about creating density to provide more density around schools, etc. But again, there's going to be a balancing to do, and so we'll continue those conversations. But wanted to give you a heads up about those 2 things, which I think transportation has actually noted before. So just want to give you a heads up on those. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any council member communications in general from anyone? All right. Well, monthly call for agenda items. Luke, briefly, we can just go through what we expect to see in the near future here, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
All right, I can read the list.
I got it. And there's one late addition. Multi-lane street reconfiguration. The request for proposal was due earlier this afternoon. We received 3 proposals, and we'll start evaluation on that one. Other possible items include Safe Street for All update. I think we're scheduled to provide a full version of the update at our February meeting. Then there's the addition of Arbor South. There was some interest in hearing more details as much as staff has them. So that's another possible item. Next year's capital projects, traffic calming, DDA, parking, and curbside use study. So those are the potential items on the radar at this moment. If there's
maybe the Fifth Avenue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. The next meeting will be held Wednesday, February 19th, 2025 at 7 p.m. That also will be a virtual meeting. For this meeting, if there are no objections, we'll adjourn the January 15th meeting. Seeing no objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.